unprecedented times we've lived through over the last little while. So we've certainly lived through all manner of stuff. And I think, as Katie touched on, just particularly last year, the media in and around aged care was pretty tough. And I did talk to a resident in one of our homes throughout the course of last year, and I said that I thought I might assist with voting at the next state election and stand at some of the booths saying, I work in private aged care, don't vote for Dan. And one of the residents said, yeah, I'll happily stand beside you and do that. So I think the criticism we received was completely unfounded and bloody harsh, to be honest. And a lot of people that have worked tirelessly have copped a fair bit of flack that wasn't necessarily warranted. And sure, there were some homes, as you were all aware, that had a number of people die, and we're seeing some hearings now outlining some of those failures. But jeepers, I wouldn't have wanted to be one of those first homes to have experienced an outbreak. And we've certainly experienced outbreaks now this year. And even with vaccination, people die. So that, I think, is the reality of the environment we work in. So, obviously we're here to talk about technology today, but at the base of what we do is people, and caring for older people is what I have done now for nearly 20 years, and it's a job that I love, and having that as a responsibility is one that I take really seriously. But in the context of IT, I think Katie touched on, we've been a client of Trident now I've been a client of Trident's for 8 years, and I've known Katie for a long time, and she failed to admit that the 1 year that we did run the Melbourne Marathon together, she beat me. So Katie's the elite athlete. So just a little bit of context around the IT environment. I started at Homestyle nearly 8 years ago. And when I arrived, the IT environment was relatively simple, would be a good way of describing it. So basically, a couple of servers with email, file servers, QuickBooks for accounts, a proprietary payroll and billing system, and we had all of our own hardware, so nothing was in the cloud. Over the course of the first few years I was there, we tweaked a few things, and with the help of both Katie and Marty, we made a few minor improvements. But we got to a point where electronic care planning, which is something that the industry uses more widely now, was something we needed to have a look at. So I put a few business cases to the board around some significant IT spend. And the funny feedback I got a couple of times was, do we really need this? And after getting that question a few times, I said, we really needed it 5 years ago. So the answer is absolutely yes, we do need this. So it took a while for us to really get our head around what it was that we needed to do from a total IT perspective. And through Katie, I was introduced to a guy by the name of Pete Gunn, and Pete's worked with us now for 3 or 4 years, and his expertise has been vital in us setting a really clear path to implement a significant amount of IT over the course of the last couple of years, and in the process make Katie really rich. So the key things that we had to...
Correct. I'm going to say that's absolutely correct, but thanks so much, Tim. I'm definitely going to charge you more next time, buddy.
But look, I think one of the things that we had to do was work out where our biggest risk was, and we had a payroll system that was the same system we used for billing, and it was a proprietary system with a developer who was not in a good way health-wise. So we saw that as a really serious risk, because obviously paying people and collecting fees from clients is a pretty important part of our business. So we prioritised that as our first project, essentially to do two things. Number one, demonstrate to the business that we could actually make change successfully, but also eliminate a risk that we saw as significant. So we managed to get those two solutions replaced. But, a payroll system in an organisation with 1,400 people, changing that with rostering and time and attendance at the same time was a significant exercise. But we managed to get through that successfully, and we certainly didn't have there was no union problems or any serious issues in regards to that implementation. So we ticked that off as a success. And to be frank, we're still tweaking that now. So that's something that we're working towards refining. And I think that's probably one of the key learnings for us too. With all of the software implementations, we didn't expect that they'd be implemented perfectly from day one. And we're now circling back on all of them to make sure that we're exploiting the most of those systems with the advantage of time. But the next thing we did was to introduce some significant hardware around Wi-Fi. And that probably sounds really funny. We have 11 sites and we care for around 1,000 people. All of those sites had one Wi-Fi point. So that was in a living area and it was designed to be used to assist people or assist our lifestyle teams. So to transition from that to completely Wi-Fi enabled homes was a significant exercise. And with the help of HP and Aruba, we implemented about $1 million worth of hardware, which sounds like a lot, but when you break it down to 10 sites, it probably per home wasn't a significant spend. So that went in as essentially the starting point for us to then consider the electronic care planning system, without which we couldn't have implemented, because obviously there's a whole heap of devices that hang off Wi-Fi that need to be used to do that care planning part of what we do. At the time, we probably didn't realise how much of a benefit that Wi-Fi was going to be, because we were sort of sitting in January, February, March of last year. So we got the Wi-Fi in, and then throughout the course of last year, we implemented electronic care planning across all 10 sites. And the feedback from Telstra Health was that it was one of the most successful implementations they've seen. I suspect we probably had to be reasonably efficient because we had a few other things that were going on, but we managed to get that in, and it's now at a point where it's stable and I think working really well. And if you think about, obviously you've all got an IT focus, but if you can think about the environment we came from, which was all care information was recorded on paper, to transitioning across to all care being implemented electronically. In the course of last year, you probably can't really imagine this, but we had a team of people assisting with that data migration. So we had people having to access the home through a separate entrance. We then had to sterilise essentially those files for that team to then process. Once that processed, we had to re-sterilise it back into the home to obviously minimise the risk of any infection. So just simple things like that in the course of last year weren't necessarily simple. They were really trying times. So we got that done, and then we did it home by home. So we used a pretty gated approach to implement that. So once each home got to a certain trigger point, they could then progress to the next stage of the implementation. So we didn't sort of whack it all in at one point. It was a really staged process. And I think that worked really well. But having a couple of internal champions has certainly assisted us, and one in particular who's currently in isolation with COVID as well was a key driver for that success. So I think that was part of us obviously future-proofing the organisation to live through the next period of time. So we then had to implement a finance ERP system, which we did successfully, and that's probably a simpler exercise because it touches fewer people. And then the next thing we moved on to, one of the things that we actually popped in this year, which again, the advantage of having good relationships with organisations like Trident, we got access to a system called Zipline. So for those of you who've seen it, you probably understand what it is, but through the course of this last period in aged care, as you'd all see when you go to any site now, you need to use a QR code to check in. But the state government had implemented a system in aged care where you had to attest every time you arrived at an aged care home that you were fit, well, and have your temperature taken. And we had one of our really great reception team members who basically break down towards the end of last year and say, "I'm really sorry, I'm failing at my job." And when we scratched the surface and spoke to her, she said, "I just can't do all of this attestation and answer all the questions and deal with all of the people that I'm having to deal with, as well as doing my day job." So we implemented an electronic version of that process, which automated the temperature testing, which was fantastic, and also skipped through all of the questions that were required to meet the state government directions around attesting to being fit and well, which of course I wouldn't meet at the minute. So that was another thing that we put in. And, I think the biggest thing for us was that I probably felt like coming from a blank canvas. And when Pete joined us, I said, just pretend we're a greenfield. And after a few days of him being in there, he said, you are a greenfield. So I think one of the great things was, whilst we saw that as probably a negative from the way we were operating, it gave us the opportunity to look at absolutely anything. So that included looking at HP's Green Lake, and obviously hosting just about everything now. So, you know, when we'd reviewed this 3 or 4 years ago, we had some legacy tin sitting in the organisation that probably influenced us a little too much. Whereas when we got to the point of doing everything a few years later, having very little in place meant that we could explore all opportunities, and the guidance we got from Trident to implement what we did, I think has put us in a good position now. But I think the key things around all of that work we did, and I don't know how much we spent, Katie, or the number of devices that we've implemented, but it's been massive. So if you think about going from paper to electronic, the number of devices we have in each home, I think we're probably up about 30 or 40 in each home. So implementing that was significant. But I think probably the Wi-Fi was the biggest thing. It was a revelation, I think, for us, which I know again sounds ludicrous, but if you put into context the year that we've been through, having access to Wi-Fi in lockdowns and visitor restrictions to enable residents to speak with family members. Again, it's a simple thing for those of us who are IT enabled and can do things relatively easily. But for us to be able to take a tablet into a resident's room and call a family member and continue that contact with family was really critical for us to continue to do. So a really small thing, but that made a huge difference for the residents in our care over the last 12 months. And I think the other thing that probably I didn't appreciate the benefit of, I didn't think the benefit would be as great as it was, but electronic care planning, I think the health sector broadly has a love-hate relationship with technology. There's very few great IT implementations in and around health, but the electronic care planning that we've implemented has been really, really useful. Again, if you think about the restrictions that we've faced, and, you know, we've all resisted going to homes, which is one of the best parts of our jobs, but being able to access that information remotely across all 10 homes and really easily review what's going on from a keyboard rather than having to physically go through paper files in the context of this last period has been invaluable. So you could probably say we were a little bit lucky with timing, but I think the benefits of that have helped us continue to manage our business remotely in a period where all manner of things changed. They were certainly trying times. I think the other thing that the electronic care planning system has done is assisted us with family questions, because you can imagine if family aren't able to visit, they have a lot of questions around, well, what's mum done? How is mum? What's dad been up to? How are his health conditions? So with the access of being able to look at that information from anywhere, so whether that was me or any of the other ops team or the people on site, they can actually access it really quickly. So that's certainly helped us continue to update families with info, which of course, when they're not able to visit, becomes really, really, really critical. And the last part of the care planning, and this was it's really funny. One of the things that we have to do as part of our compliance is report on medication errors. And if any of you followed the Royal Commission into Aged Care, med management and medication issues would have been one of the key things that came up time and time again as being problematic. We've implemented an electronic medication management system, and those errors have dropped from hundreds now down to essentially zero. You can't make an error with an electronic med management system. So, yeah, we've traversed a pretty significant path to implement a whole lot of stuff in a time frame, which, yeah, I think the timing in which we did it, but the context of the years that we did it was a pretty remarkable effort from a great number of people. And I think, you know, the Trident guys have been really, really wonderful in supporting us. And I think that's the hard part. You know, there have been times when we said, okay, we want to implement that piece of hardware in this home, and then something will have changed, whether it's a government direction or an outbreak. You know, we've had to constantly pivot to make those changes to get the gear in, but obviously meeting all of those restrictions and changes that have been thrust upon us. So, yeah, I certainly hope that the next 12 months are a little easier to navigate than what the past have been, because it's been, as Katie said, working in aged care in this last bit has been, bloody hard work. But I think we certainly seem to be seeing the end of it. But I think as I'm experiencing now during COVID, I think you're all going to get it at some point in the near future. I wouldn't wish it upon you, but I think as we get through this next few months and year, I think that having COVID is just going to be something that we'll get used to experiencing, as we have done with the flu, as the vaccination rates all improve. I reckon that's probably about it from me. Does anyone have any questions? It's funny, you all look blurry. I don't know if that's my eyesight failing as part of one of my symptoms, or the camera is just blurry, or Katie put Vass on the lens to make herself look prettier.
Tim, tell me something. So you may be a little bit confused about some of the themes of our session today. You know, we've started off with culture and resilience and how to build a good workplace and build good individuals. And then we've moved to how important technology is in the aged care side. And this is an Aruba conference, but I'm about to tie that together. I personally think that we need to have building blocks, particularly in our new world, of really good access to networks at every point in the environment and at individuals' homes. And we can't really create culture until we actually have that. That's just the Massey Ferguson tractor getting the ground right. You can't build culture or resilient individuals or have good outcomes if we've always got saying bloody IT, you know, or bloody Tim, or bloody Trident, or bloody Katie, or whatever it happens to be at that time. People are way outside their flow when they can't connect to a network. And I don't know when this happened. You know, we used to actually have dial-up modems, and we were really comfortable to sit there for 2 minutes and wait. In fact, the noise was actually almost a little calming, you know, that kind of thing. You know, when we printed, you know, we'd wait. Like, you'd actually, I mean, when I was at university, you'd watch it, like, actually make up the A, you know, that's what we did. That's what we expected. And that was kind of nice, to be honest, because now our expectations are so high. So customer expectations are really high. You know, I was speaking to a customer last week and there was an incident. You know, we're in IT, incidents happen. In aged care, incidents happen. And they said, but why did this happen? You know, I said, well, we can't pinpoint that right at the moment, but that's why you have backup. You know, why do I need backup? Because for the things that I can't pinpoint, you know, but these are kind of really difficult concepts to tell someone about when they feel that, you know, we've invested and we've done these kinds of things. So I'm not sure which part of IT I actually preferred. You know, I mean, I've been at Trident now for 27 years. I was about 5 when I started. And I do thank you, Tim, for the money that you have gifted to the Spirit shareholders, because it was after I sold my business. Thanks a lot. But if you look at the changes in IT over that period of time, the biggest piece is that people want things now and faster and more resilient.
Yeah. And
as I've kind of learned through working with Spirit, we can't actually achieve that until we have the staff, the resilient staff. One of the interesting things that John said earlier was, have you actually asked your staff what conditions they work the best in? I thought that was a really powerful question. You know, we had like, you know, just a super daggy slap together last week or the week before with our sales team, with Danielle Watts, our new Victorian head of sales, talking about love language. And it was kind of like a little bit of a jokey thing, but it was just to start getting the conversation rolling about how they perform the best, you know, how they move into that flow. And I don't think Dan and I were anywhere near as articulate as John. In fact, you can actually get John to your organisation. That's how I met him about 5 or 6 years ago when I was at Furbank for a parent information night for my my daughter. And I just thought he was absolutely incredible. So I bring him in a lot to different things. And even, you know, I was talking to him earlier. I said, oh, you know, my 17-year-old daughter, I've got a challenge. And he said, oh, we've got this book, we've got this, try this, you know. So he really is a man of a number of different skills. But all of these things that Tim and John have been talking about today, I actually think you need good technology. And really, the only technology that we sell for networking is Aruba. And that has been a terrifically successful relationship over the last 8 to 10 years. And what I love working about it with Aruba, and I hope that people would say this when they work with Trident, is that we're really agile. And you can get hold of the lead executives at any time of the day or night, and they will help. They are relentless in coming up with innovative ways to skin the cat. And that's exactly the kind of supplier that I like dealing with. So with that, Timothy, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so disappointed that you're not going to be running with me on Sunday. I don't think Tim and I are actually particularly prepared. I'm not sure how we're going to get into the flow because it's going to be 29 degrees in the middle of December. And
what time do you want the ambulance booked for,
yeah,
Kate?
I'm looking anything with it. I'm thinking about 12. Right, I'll be just about ready for that one. But I really appreciate your time. It's been, you know, we've had so much fun together over the last couple of years, but we've also done some really good things. So thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, guys.